What's up guys, welcome back to Deck Tech for Decks. I'm your host Caleb. Today we're building the OG Atraxa, and yes, it's going to be that Atraxa deck, Atraxa Infect. But if you're like me, you always looked at Atraxa and said, one Proliferation trigger is just not enough, so we need 10 Atraxas. That's what we're going to try to do today. We're going to get 10 Atraxas. That way, all we have to do is cast this 2-mana spell, give everyone a poison counter, cast Nanogen Conversion, and boom, we get 10 Atraxas, win the game because we proliferate 10 times. They've got 10 poison counters, and it's all history from there. But before we get into it, let's shout out those patrons. Irrelevant, you rock. Additionally, if you guys want a free $15, you can click on that whatnot link in the description down below. Helps out the channel. You guys get free money. Additionally, just liking, commenting, and subscribing is always appreciated. Now, let's get into the overall goal of this Atraxa deck. The first thing we need for this strategy to work is actually 10 creatures. So we're going to be playing a lot of low to the ground creatures that help with our strategy that just do amazing things like Tymna. Tymna is going to draw us additional cards. We can play Orin Frostfang. That way all of our little creatures that get through have death touch, and then additionally we're getting card advantage. Not to mention, we're going to be playing a lot of little creatures with Toxic. I know the main goal is to get those free Toxic cards that are just like 2 mana, give everybody a poison counter, draw a card, but a little bit of Toxic, as long as we can get it on all 3 players, is going to help us out. We're also going to be playing Skittles and Tyrannus Rex. Turns out, whenever you have 7 creatures on the battlefield and Nanogen Conversion in hand, turning them all into a Skittles or Tyrannus Rex kind of just wins you the game as well. There's just a ton of very flexible targets whenever it comes down to Nanogen Conversion in this deck. Turns out 10 Thrumming Birds is kind of the same as 10 Atraxas. We just have to connect with them. We proliferate 10 times. People are still going to die. Not to mention, I do just kind of want to play this deck and out of nowhere win with a Wormquake. This card has always intrigued me. It's not very good, but it's in the deck and maybe we win with it eventually. I'm excited to try it out. Finally gonna do something with it, hopefully. With that being said, guys, let's get into this deck tech. We'll go into the intricacies and how we plan to kill everybody. The first thing we have to do to ensure this strategy works is get a poison counter on all of our opponents. Infectious Inquiry, Prolonged to Pheresis, Pheresis Outbreak, Drowning Ichor, and Vraska's Fall are super efficient ways to do this. We don't have to attack our opponents, we just have to cast a spell and boom, everybody gets a poison counter. Leaning on the Infect and Toxic mechanic also isn't a terrible idea. Skithrix is going to be in this deck. Not only can we regenerate this guy, but additionally we can give him haste, cast him out of nowhere, and hit someone for 4 infect. That can kill in this deck. Tainted Strike is also going to get an include here. I mean, this is already going to be a deck that generates a ton of salt, so might as well throw this in here and kill someone out of nowhere for 1 black mana. Tyrannus Rex is going to be included. This guy is amazing whenever we have multiple copies of him, and then additionally just giving someone 4 toxic is going to be very impactful, speeds up the clock a little bit. Give this guy infect, and again, he does the thing. Skrull Defector Might is also going to be amazing here. This guy can give one of our creatures toxic, and then additionally, it can protect our creatures at the same time. Bloated Contaminator. I like this guy because not only can he proliferate, just adding more poison counters to all of our opponents, additionally, he does have Toxic 1 and Trample, plus he comes down super early on turn 3. Ixil's going to be pretty interesting here as well. It has Flying, Vigilance, and Toxic 2, so that's good. And then at the beginning of each step, each opponent who has 3 or more poison counters exiles the top card of their library face down. You may look at that card and play those cards for as long as they remain exiled. You can spend mana as any color as well. So this is not only going to, again, get toxic counters on our opponents, it's also going to give us free card advantage. Containment Crafter has always been a card I've wanted to try out, and this seems like the perfect deck. Not only does this thing have Trample and Toxic 1, additionally, as long as we're hitting our opponents once per turn, he's going to be a constant source of proliferation, and then at the beginning of each end step, as long as one of our opponents has 3 or more poison counters, we don't only get to put a land into play, additionally we get to draw a card. Mirror Convert also seemed amazing here, comes down super early, it's added ramp, and in a pinch it can add that poison counter to one of our opponents. Norn's Decree is going to do 2 things, but it's going to be the same thing 2 different ways, right? This is just going to disincentivize our opponents from attacking us. 1, if they attack us with a creature, they're going to get a poison counter. 2, whenever somebody attacks a player with a poison counter, that player gets to draw a card. So now they're incentivized to attack each other instead of us, and then whenever we attack them as well, we are also drawing cards, so it's a win-win. Merix and Inkmoth Nexus are 2 lands that turn into creatures that have Toxic or Infect, so that's going to be helpful. Again, all we really need is just 1 poison counter on our opponents. Wormquake, again, this is kind of in the deck as a meme, but maybe it becomes relevant and maybe we win with the game with it. I've got my fingers crossed. I mean, honestly, late game 10 mana to add 4 10/10s to the battlefield seems like a pretty good idea. After we get our opponents all poisoned up, the next thing we have to do is proliferate. Contagion Engine is going to be amazing here. Not only can this effectively wipe one of our opponent's boards out, but additionally it has the ability to spend 4 mana and then we get to proliferate twice. So now we're getting 2 poison counters off of this and then 1 from Atraxa. That's 3 poison counters a turn. Kind of crazy. Throaming Bird is pretty simple. It just attacks. If it deals combat damage, you get to proliferate. Dreamtide Whale. I'm super excited about this because it has Vanishing. Now, Vanishing is a counter that does get placed on the creature. So as long as we keep proliferating, we can keep this guy around indefinitely. And then he has a really broken ability. Whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, we get to proliferate. So that's going to probably be at least 1 or 2 proliferations a turn consistently. And you can get up to 4 a rotation with this. It's absolutely broken. Glistening Sphere is just a mana rock that proliferates when it enters the battlefield, and then as long as an opponent has 3 poison counters on it, it taps for 3 mana, so we're going to take that. Tekuthal does not proliferate himself, but he does say whenever we proliferate twice instead, which is going to be very impactful. Staff of Completion does a little bit of everything, and remember, Atraxa does have life gain, so we're going to very easily be able to consistently activate this every turn without any fear of dying. We can pay 1 life to destroy a permanent that we own, pay 2 life to add a mana, 3 life to proliferate, 4 life to draw a card, and then 5 life to untap Staff of Completion. So in a perfect world, we just gain a ton of life with our commander, and then we're able to proliferate, untap, proliferate, you know, and kind of kill the table. Azuri, Stalker of Fears. This guy's pretty simple and very useful in the deck. Whenever we proliferate, he just says draw a card. And then he also has a super expensive alternate casting cost for 7. Paying an additional 3. And then whenever he enters the battlefield, if we paid that additional 3, we get to proliferate twice. You can kill the table with this if you're just missing a little bit of proliferation, because remember, proliferating twice with our commander on the battlefield, we get 3 proliferations a turn. That can get us there sometimes. And then that's also just going to draw us 2 cards because, you know, that's what he says. Innkeeper's Talent doesn't proliferate, but it does add to the amount of poison counters we are putting on our opponents, which there is very few cards that do that. At the beginning of combat on your turn, we get to put a 1/1 counter on a creature we control. Very good with Atraxa, putting a counter on Atraxa and then just proliferating her, making her bigger, gaining us more life. Very useful because, again, we are going to be drawing a lot of hate from our opponents. Then we can level it up. Permanents you control with counters on them have Ward 1, protects our commander a little bit. Then for the last level, it gets really wordy, but all you need to know is it's just going to double the amount of counters we put on anything, including players. So that means doubling up on our poison counters, our 1/1 counters, anything basically. Moving on to the portion of the deck that just ties everything together, we have Nanogen Conversion and Echoing Equations. All we have to do is choose our most busted creature on the battlefield, and that's going to turn every creature on our side of the battlefield or every creature on the battlefield into those, depending on which one you cast. Nanogen Conversion is going to work for everybody, and then Echoing Equation is just going to work for us. Notably though, if we're just trying to proliferate and kill everybody with 10 Atraxas like the thumbnail suggests, all you have to do is go to your end step, proliferate 10 times, and you've won the game. But as I stated in the intro, there's a lot of other creatures that can get us there that aren't Atraxa that can just proliferate 10 times. So there's a lot of fun and unique things you can do with this card, so just have fun with it. Spikeweaver also seemed super annoying in this deck. Remember, we're probably going to be taking the aggro because we're playing Atraxa Infect, so having something like Spikeweaver that can just prevent all combat damage consistently is going to be pretty effective. Spitting Dilophosaurus, now this is a really cool card that I did not know existed, and it just seems super broken in this deck. Whenever he attacks, we get to put a negative counter on a creature. That creature is now not able to block. Additionally, that's a negative counter we can proliferate with Atraxa, so he's able to kill our opponent's key creatures while preventing them from block, allowing all of our toxic creatures to get through. This guy was literally built for this deck. Astral Cornucopia and Everflowing Chalice, we just proliferate the counters on these, and then they're going to allow us to add progressively more and more mana. Notably, again, Atraxa is not the only thing proliferating in this deck, so these mana rocks can absolutely pop off and start generating an absolutely insane amount of mana. Ingenious Prodigy just seemed super solid here. It has Skulk, we're able to remove the counters to draw cards, and then we're able to put more counters on it, effectively making it a 2 CMC Phyrexian Arena. Fathom Mage is going to be an amazing source of card advantage, and it's just going to get massive. It's going to be basically another copy of Azuri in the deck, because whenever we put a 1/1 counter on it, we get it to draw a card. So again, whenever we proliferate, we get a draw card. There's also a lot of other ways to put 1/1 counters on creatures in this deck, and we're going to draw a card whenever we do that as well. Polywog Prodigy, not the greatest in casual, but I think we can get this guy massive in this deck, and then he's just going to cause us to draw a ton of cards. So we're going to try him out. Evolution Witness, we put a 1/1 counter on it. We get to return a permanent card from our graveyard to our hand. So that's going to get back any of our key pieces that our opponents are trying to remove, which is the majority of this deck, make no mistake. Speaking of things our opponents are going to want to remove, Toxrill, the Corrosive. This guy is just toxic, so why not put him in this deck? It makes perfect sense here. We can proliferate the negative counters to get rid of our opponent's creatures faster, and again, it's just going to make our opponents upset, and they're going to already be upset, so might as well run this guy. On a serious note though, this guy just does an amazing job of getting rid of those board states that get super massive quickly, and it gets rid of all of our opponent's blockers, which is what this deck needs. The Wise Mothman seems solid here as well. It just adds a ton of 1/1 counters to our board. If we can make Atraxa massive, it's just going to help us out. It's going to gain us a ton of life, and then again, we have a lot of ways to utilize that life to get a lot of advantages. Ozolith, the Shattered Spire, this one's absolutely insane. When you pair it with Proliferation, it gets a lot of counters on creatures very quickly. We put a 1/1 counter on Atraxa. Now Atraxa has 2 1/1 counters because of the Ozolith, and then at the end step, we proliferate, which again puts another 2 counters on Atraxa. That's 4 counters on her a turn. Now she's not a 4/4, now she's an 8/8. Sylvan Library, Black Market Connections, and Lothal are just amazing cards we can sink life into to get insane advantages out of them. Lothal you don't really sink life into, but you get where I'm coming from. Propaganda is going to be amazing to keep those aggro decks away from us in the early game. We're also going to be playing Orin Frostfang, Timna the Weaver, and Grim Hireling. These are amazing cards here. Orin Frostfang is going to give all of our creatures Death Touch, so it's going to disincentivize our opponents from blocking. And then remember, the goal of this deck is to deal at least 1 damage or 1 form of toxic or infect damage to our opponents every turn consistently to start racking up those poison counters. I want to be getting advantage whenever I'm hitting them, so card advantage and mana generation are going to be very important for this deck, and these cards do all of it. Grim Hireling can also be an amazing way to get rid of blockers, that way we can get our infect creatures through as well. That's going to do it for the deck tech, guys. Now get out there and be toxic. Shout out to my patrons, Irrelevant Chicken Salad, Praetor, The Professional Heal. You guys are amazing. Keep the channel going. Allow me to do what I do. With that being said, I hope this helped you in your deck building endeavors, and I will see you in the next one.